Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and we're back for another video of Warhammer The Old World. Now, I am currently away, I'm out of the country, about to embark upon a wedding and a honeymoon, and Games Workshop, without any without any warning at all, and we've got a fairly interesting look, a first rule look at Warhammer The Old World. So, the video may be a little bit down in terms of quality. We will try and make up for that with content, as I am trying to record this for the very first time on a laptop that is not designed particularly for this task. However, it's going to be 3 weeks before I will be back and able to look at this, and I wanted to try and get something out as soon as possible, so I hope you can appreciate that. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the article that has been posted on the Warhammer Community website. So it's under Warhammer The Old World, and the article posted on the 30th of October, and it is titled Old World Almanac, Your First Look at the Rules. So again, they confirm the Old World nearing release in early 2024. We knew that from the Warhammer Day reveal, and they say it's now time to look at a first look at some of the actual rules in the game. So it says that today they're going to be looking at the first main phase, which is the strategy phase, okay? And then game structure, they're talking about the game's design from the ground up, but that's taking inspiration from what came before, okay? It does say to simulate large regiments, so I wonder if that's an indication of the numbers of models per unit that we're going to expect. As we know, if an army does require hundreds of models, it's expensive and also incredibly time consuming to get a painted army. That can be off-putting for some, so we'll have to see how that pans out. They talk about several popular editions of Warhammer Fantasy. 5th and 6th is probably, and even 3rd edition, some of that. Much of the complexity has been kept. Okay, that's good, because I think that's what a lot of people want from this, particularly regarding morale. Okay, a lot of thought's been put into the structure of phases. So let's have a look at the turn sequence then. So there are 4 phases: strategy phase, movement phase, shooting phase, combat phase. So there's no morale / battle shock phase, or whatever you want to term it, and there is no magic phase. Okay, so let's see the strategy phase. That's what they're going to be going into in more depth later in this article, but the basics of it is during the strategy phase, the active player attempts to cast enchantment or hex, read that buff / debuff spells, and make use of certain special rules before attempting to rally any fleeing units. So it looks like rallying fleeing units is going to be at the end of the phase. It looks like you're going to have your characters' equivalent command style abilities are going to be here, and we're going to have some magic in this, but it looks like it's specific to buffing units or debuffing enemy units. Okay. Number 2, the movement phase. So the movement phase starts with the declaration of charges and charge reactions. Okay, so there's no dedicated charge phase, and you're going to start by doing charges and charge reactions first, and it does confirm there will be charge reactions, which is good. Then you're going to move those charging units, okay, and then comes compulsory movement. So that could be something if a unit is stupid, for example, and has to move, or you've got anything that you don't have control over movement, they have to move, okay. And then finally, any remaining movement is carried out, and conveyance spells are cast. So those are spells that are either going to pick people up and move them, or essentially going to give them bonuses to move. Okay. The shooting phase then. So during the shooting phase, the active player shoots with those units in their army that they're armed with missile weapons, with their war machines and attempts to cast magic missile and magical vortex spells. So clearly what we can see here is magic is in every phase, or there's the option at least for magic in every phase, assuming you have those spells. We'll wait and see what happens in terms of winds of magic. Is there going to be a pool of dice? Is it just going to be you can cast the spells that your wizard has and you just need to reach the casting value? There's obviously going to be more detail on that in a later article. Next up, and the last phase, is the combat phase. During this phase, units fight in deadly hand-to-hand melee, and wizards attempt to fend off their attackers with assailment spells. We've got assailment spells here. Units that have lost combat may be driven back or become broken and flee. So driven back mechanic was an old mechanic. I think it was 3rd edition, if I remember correctly, that had that mechanic in. It's also present in War Master. That was the epic scale Warhammer Fantasy, so that's quite interesting. We'll see how driven back works. The advantage of driven back, of course, if you have the numbers, potentially you can push off like a tough combat unit. So if you had a unit, let's say Chaos Warriors or Chaos Chosen even, but you had enough numbers, you could potentially push that deadly unit off an objective, for example. You also can become broken and flee. Okay, so fleeing, so we're not looking at the sort of the modern thing where models / units are just taken off the table. That unit will turn round and run away but remain on the board. That's interesting. And at the end of this phase, once all combats have been resolved, the active player's turn ends. Okay, right, so game of rounds and turns. So yeah, pretty familiar for anyone that's played Games Workshop games before. You've got a battle round essentially, and in that battle round there are 2 turns, 1 for each player. Okay, so that's all. Every phase is also broken down into 4 steps called sub-phases. Okay, so every phase has got 4 sub-phases. So this article is going to focus on the strategy phase. So it says here, we begin with the start of turn sub-phase, okay, which is where certain units perform special actions or take tests. These aren't common and their details will be clearly stated in their rules. So they give example of stone trolls would take their stupidity test at this point. Okay, so that would then mean allow for then in the movement phase, if they failed stupidity and they had a compulsory move towards the enemy, at this point they would have failed the test to allow that to happen in the movement phase. Okay, and it's also where Night Goblin fanatics are placed on the table. So if you're not familiar from previous, if you attacked a Night Goblin unit, spearmen or archers, fanatics then are released from that unit. And here it says this is when they're placed on the table. Okay, so that's the first part of the strategy phase. Also, a particular scenario may require you to check whether a victory condition has been met at this point. So obviously victory conditions here, and obviously then tidying the table of casualties and dice. Okay, right, second sub-phase, more exciting, command. So this is when most characters' special rules fire off. Okay, we talked about that before. For instance, a Bretonnian lord brandishing the falcon horn of Fredemund may blow it in the command sub-phase, hopefully preventing opponents from being able to fly. And they've given us a bit of a breakdown of that. So what do we know about this thing? So it's an enchanted item. So what do we know about this? It means we're going to have faction-specific items. If we look back at previous Warhammer Fantasy, you had essentially a maximum number of points that could be spent on magic items, and you had everything from enchanted items, arcane items, magic weapons, magic armor, and so on. Now it says here, Falcon Horn of Fredemund. This ancient horn was used by the Grail companion Duke Fredemund of Aquitaine. When blown, it emits a piercing cry, and the skies become filled with flocks of hunting birds. So what does it do? During the command sub-phase of their turn, if they're not engaged in combat, this character may attempt to use the Falcon Horn of Fredemund by making a leadership test using their own unmodified leadership. Now, in terms of leadership tests, what we don't know is it going to be the ultra modern format in 40k where you have to roll 2 dice and go over the leadership to simulate that now every dice roll has to beat a number, or is it going to be more reminiscent of the old style where you have to roll 2 dice and roll under the leadership? So we still don't know that yet. So if you pass the test until the start of your next turn subphase, enemy units cannot use the Fly X special rule. So Fly X, that kind of tells me that flying's going to have its specific movement characteristics. So let's take, I don't know, a dragon. Let's say it can probably move 6 as an example, or whatever distance they're going to give it. That will be on the ground. But if it flies, which means it can pass over units, over terrain, it will have its own fly. So it might have fly 12, for example. So this item is going to stop that. That would seem quite powerful if you could use it in every turn. Again, what we don't know, for example, are enchanted items one use only? Is this one use only? If you took an old style of leadership test and used, let's take a Bretonnian Lord's leadership in the past, you'd be able to do this for between 60 and 70% of the turn. So if you had 5 battle rounds on average, 3 of those battle rounds you'd be able to stop the opponent using any flying units. That would be quite strong. I would like to think this is a one use only thing, and it wouldn't be unusual to say enchanted items were one use only or something like that, or maybe there's an addendum to this, we don't know. So no point jumping into this now, we don't know enough, but just something to take into account. That could be quite strong against some armies, even against an enemy Bretonnian army with things like Pegasus Knights and so on, or a lord that's riding a Pegasus or Hippogriff or whatever happens. So interesting one there. Certainly there's a few things we can take from that. And then what does it say? Where would Warhammer be without magic? So there's no magic phase, we saw that. Instead, magic powers and spells are cast during relevant phases. Hand of Mork or Gork is a conveyance spell, so we know that now, which means it's cast in the movement phase. So Hand of Mork or Gork, pick a unit up, put it, move it forward or move it around. Okay, that makes sense. However, the third step of the strategy phase is Conjuration, which is when you cast enchantments, magical boosts for your allies, buffs, or hexes, magical penalties for your enemies, debuffs. Players take it in turns during this step to choose wizards who aren't fleeing to attempt to cast spells. Now, of course, we know that you can't attempt to rally until the end of this phase, so if your wizards are fleeing, that's a problem. So they give an example of the Tomb Kings now. So the Tomb Kings, for example, might choose to cast Jajaf's Incantation of Cursed Blades from the Lord Nehekara. What's a casting value? They'll go into more detail in Magic on another article. So let's take a look at this. Lord Nehekara. Okay, as Least Priest utters this ancient mantra, the weapons of the Nehekaran warriors gathered about them become imbued with the essence of Djaf, the jackal-headed god of the dead, who hungers for the souls of the living above all things. Okay, so it gives you the type enchantment. That tells us what phase you cast it in. It gives us a casting value, 7+. Again, no way to know at this point, is this just roll 2 dice and beat the casting value as a more modern game system, or is this as in the past where you have pools of dice? If I had to guess, it's probably more based on the modern one to take the complexity out of having pools of dice that you have to track and manage. So range is self. Okay, that's interesting. And then effect, until your next start of turn subphase, any friendly unit that has the Nehekaran Undead special rule. So I guess that, this is going to be like keywords, right? And that is within the caster's command range. Okay, so there's going to be command ranges. If you look at a previous Previous rules, command ranges sort of around about 12 inches, maybe for a lesser hero, for example, could be 6 inches. May re-roll any rolls to hit of a natural 1. Have to say 1, that feels a bit kind of generic. Also, as a personal thing, I'm not a big fan of re-rolls. They just lengthen the game and phases, because you're just having to roll more dice. Now, we don't know how the game's going to play out, of course, but I would prefer pluses to hit, for example, as opposed to re-rolls of 1. So I'm not the biggest fan of re-rolling dice. But we'll see how this plays out, not jumping to conclusions until we know more. Okay, moving on. The final step in this phase is rallying fleeing troops. Okay, this is when the active player must attempt to rally all of their units that are fleeing. To take a rally test, choose a unit and roll 2 dice against its leadership characteristic. So it still doesn't tell us if you roll, so we know we roll 2 dice. It doesn't tell us if we have to roll under a leadership characteristic or if we have to roll over a leadership characteristic, so we still don't know that. It just says if you fail, it will continue to flee during the movement phase. If you pass, your unit is allowed a free reform move and returns to the fray. Okay, so flee. So if you do fail, that would be part of your compulsory movement. Okay, so then it says we'll have more on morale in a later article 2, but please do bear in mind that if your unit is under half strength, you get -1 modifier to its leadership. -1 modifier to its leadership. So if you had a leadership of 7, it would be 6. That would suggest that you have to roll under the leadership. But if that's -1 to, but it could be just -1 to your dice roll, right? So if you rolled 7 on your dice, that would then be 6. So we still don't know from that what that means. But here we go. Under 25%, you need a natural double 1. Okay, that suggests to me that it is the older style system where you have to roll under the leadership. So that -1 modifier would be if your characteristic stat on your Bretonian Lord is 8, let's say, he would now have leadership of 7 if his unit was under half strength. And then if you're under 25%, you need natural double 1. Chance of that, incredibly low. So, really at that point is it worth even rolling? I guess you can always chance the luck. What does that really mean? It does mean that there's a reason to potentially either chase down, overrun, or certainly, continue to damage fleeing units, so that you can essentially completely rout them and have no chance of them coming back to battle. So that's certainly interesting. It's kind of like you get to a point where it gives reason to go after these units that are broken. Okay, right. Okay, that brings us to pretty much the end of the article. So there's a lot more to clue you in on for Warhammer The Old World in the coming months. We'll be tackling the rest of the phases, plus rules for magic, morale, psychology, and other matters. Okay. We'll also be taking a closer look at the factions, the setting, and the models, and the future of the game. Okay, great. So overall, an interesting article. I think it's great that we now get a chance to have a first look at the rules. There's a couple of things that we can kind of look into and unpick from what's said here. So that's all quite interesting. It is just a first look. There's nothing, I would say, that's groundbreaking in here. There's nothing that kind of hasn't been hinted at before, or that you can suddenly go, oh, this is absolutely crazy. We have no idea on movement. We don't know if charges are random or not, whatever your flavour on that is. So there's, I think some of the bigger questions remain outstanding in this, and even though we kind of knew there was no magic phase, and we kind of now know how magic is going to where it's going to happen in the game, we have no idea of how magic is going to happen in the game. So an interesting article. Great to start getting a first look at the rules. So very happy with that. Clearly, as we get closer to Christmas and then into the new year, we're going to get more and more of these articles. I will be doing my best to cover these articles when they come out, despite me being away and on a laptop. So again, I certainly apologize that the potential quality of this video is certainly down, but I didn't want to wait 3 weeks to have a look at this article and sort of delve into it and see what we can pull out from it. With that said, I hope you've enjoyed this video and this look at this article. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't know, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to see more of this content, please hit that subscribe button. It means a lot for me. It's totally free for you to do, so thank you for that in advance. We've got our Bretonian Faction Focus series running at the moment, and I'm in the process of preparing everything for the Vampire Counts. And then the Empire. Those are going to be the next 2 factions. So as soon as I get back from my honeymoon, I'll be looking at recording those and getting them up on the channel as well. You've been watching The Ghost Owl. Tune back in for some more Warhammer The Old World content, or even if you're into those video games as well, check some of that video game content out as well.